My wife said, if you don't trust me spending every weekend with my ex-husband, maybe we shouldn't be together. I replied, you're absolutely right. The next day, I accepted the job transfer to London I'd been turning down for her. When she texted, what are you doing this weekend? I sent a selfie from Heathrow Airport. The day my wife told me, if you don't trust me hanging out with my ex-husband every weekend, maybe we shouldn't be together, a switch flipped inside me. I looked her dead in the eye and calmly said, you're absolutely right. It was the quietest earthquake I'd ever experienced. My name is Marcus, and at 31 I genuinely thought I had this whole adulting thing mastered. Oh, the sweet, delusional ignorance. 3 years of marriage to Clara, who was 29, had lulled me into a false sense of security, like those people who think they're immortal because they've never been in a car crash. We had what everyone called the good life, the Instagram perfect kind that, in reality, felt like watching paint dry. Clara, bless her heart, still navigated life like a perpetually confused college sophomore, always discovering herself through a series of questionable choices and ridiculously overpriced coffee. But hey, love makes you stupid, and I was practically brain dead when it came to her. We had the full suburban dream package, steady jobs we loved to hate, an apartment we pretended to adore, but was definitely overpriced, and those ambitious 5-year plans couples concoct when they're running high on optimism and low on actual experience. Everything was cruising along in that beautifully boring way that makes your parents proud and your single friends inexplicably jealous. I should have known the universe was just setting me up for the cosmic punchline of my life. Because that's when Adrian decided to make his grand re-entrance into our perfectly choreographed existence. Adrian. Even his name sounded pretentious. He was Clara's ex-husband. Yeah, you heard that right, ex-husband. Because apparently, my wife had been married before, a little tidbit she thought was perfectly normal to drop 6 months into our relationship. Oh, by the way, I was married to this guy Adrian for 2 years, but it didn't work out because he was emotionally unavailable and had commitment issues. Classic red flag, cleverly disguised as vulnerability. I was too whipped to see it then. So, Mr. Emotionally Unavailable decided to grace our little town with his presence again, and suddenly, Clara developed this overwhelming urge to catch up. And by catch up, I mean he systematically replaced every weekend activity we used to do together with Adrian-themed adventures. It started innocently enough. Saturday brunch at that impossibly chic downtown cafe where $12 avocado toast is artisanal. Because nothing screams, just friends, like spending your Saturday morning staring into your ex-husband's eyes over Eggs Benedict. But of course, it didn't stop there. It never does it? Saturday brunch became Sunday walks through the park because Adrian was apparently going through some profound existential crisis and needed Clara's unique brand of emotional support. You know, the kind that requires long, meaningful conversations while strolling past happy families and couples who actually spent their weekends together. Then came the Friday movie nights because poor Adrian was going through a rough patch and needed someone to hold his hand through the latest Marvel movie. Funny how his rough patch seemed to coincide perfectly with our date nights. I really tried to be the understanding husband. I channeled every piece of marriage advice I'd ever ignored and attempted to trust my wife. But trust is a funny thing. It's like trying to ignore a mosquito buzzing around your head. You can pretend it's not there for a while, but eventually, you're going to get bit, and it's going to itch like hell. The signs were everywhere, but I was apparently fluent in denial. Clara started wearing a new perfume, something expensive and sultry, for him. She'd spend an hour doing her hair for these casual friend meetings, styling it in ways that screamed anything but casual. And don't even get me started on the phone situation. My wife, who used to barely glance at her phone during our conversations, was suddenly giggling at text messages like a teenager with her first crush. The worst part? She laughed at her phone more than she laughed at my jokes. And let me tell you, my jokes are comedy gold. Okay, maybe comedy bronze, but still, when your wife finds her phone more entertaining than you, it's time to reevaluate some life choices. Enter the supporting cast of this tragicomedy. Leia, Clara's best friend, had apparently appointed herself the official cheerleader for this disaster in the making. Leia was one of those friends who gives terrible advice with complete confidence, like a GPS that's constantly recalculating, but never actually gets you where you need to go. Marcus, she'd say with that condescending smile, you need to understand that exes can absolutely be just friends. It's actually really mature and healthy. Right, because nothing screams emotional maturity like spending every weekend with the person you divorced. Then there was Jordan, my best buddy, and the voice of reason I chose to ignore. Jordan had this amazing ability to raise his eyebrows in a way that said, "Dude, are you seriously not seeing this?" without actually having to voice his concerns. He'd give me that look every time I mentioned Clara's weekend plans, but being the good friend he was, he'd just tell me to keep cool and trust the process. The process, as it turned out, was my marriage slowly imploding while I pretended everything was fine. But I tried. God, I really tried to keep cool. I perfected the art of fake smiling when Clara would come home, glowing from her friend dates. I bit my tongue when she'd spend an hour getting ready for coffee with Adrian. I even managed to nod along when she'd tell me about their deep conversations and shared memories, as if I was supposed to be happy that my wife was emotionally reconnecting with her ex-husband every single weekend. The unease grew like a tumor in my chest, feeding on every canceled plan, every secretive phone call, and every time she chose Adrian over me. But I kept telling myself I was being paranoid, that I was the problem, that maybe I needed to be more secure in my marriage. What I didn't realize was that my marriage was already over. I was just the last one to get the memo. The breaking point didn't come with some dramatic revelation or catching them in bed together, like you see in the movies. No, it arrived on a perfectly ordinary Saturday morning with the subtlety of a freight train to the face. I was sitting at our kitchen table, drinking coffee that had gone cold while I pretended to read the news on my phone. Clara emerged from our bedroom looking like she was headed to a damn photo shoot. She'd done that thing with her hair again. You know, that effortless, but actually took an hour look she perfected for her Adrian dates. The perfume cloud hit me before she even entered the kitchen, and I swear I could practically see cartoon stink lines wafting off her. She was wearing a sundress I'd bought her for our anniversary last year, the one she claimed was too fancy for everyday wear, but apparently just fancy enough for casual Saturday hangouts with her ex-husband. "Morning, babe," she chirped, grabbing her purse and checking her reflection in the toaster. Because nothing says authentic relationship like using kitchen appliances as mirrors while your husband sits 3 feet away. I looked up from my phone, where I'd been scrolling through the same article about cryptocurrency for the past 20 minutes without absorbing a single word. "Let me guess," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "Another emergency Adrian session?" She paused, and for a split second, I saw something flicker across her face. Guilt, maybe, or annoyance that I dared to question her Saturday ritual. "We're just getting coffee, Marcus. He's still going through that rough patch, remember? Right, the rough patch. Adrian's mysterious life crisis that apparently required more attention than a newborn baby and had been going on for 3 months now." I wondered what exactly constituted this rough patch. His inability to find a decent apartment? His struggle with commitment issues? Or maybe just the devastating realization that he'd let Clara slip away. My money was on the latter. "Actually," I said, setting down my phone and looking directly at her, "I was thinking we could try that new place downtown today. You know, the one with the bottomless mimosas you've been talking about for weeks." The suggestion hung in the air like a bad smell. Clara's face went through this amazing transformation, confusion, then irritation, then that special kind of exasperation reserved for husbands who dare to want to spend time with their wives. She rolled her eyes with the dramatic flair of a teenager being asked to clean her room. "Marcus, we've been over this like a million times. Adrian and I are just friends. We're adults. We can handle having a platonic relationship, right?" I nodded slowly. "Platonic? Got it. That's why you're wearing the anniversary dress and enough perfume to knock out a horse." "Don't be ridiculous," she snapped, but her hand instinctively went to smooth down the dress. "I always dress nicely when I go out." That was rich. The woman who wore sweatpants to the grocery store and considered putting on mascara a special occasion suddenly had standards for coffee dates with her ex. But I wasn't done yet. Call it masochistic, but I needed to hear her say it. "So skip it today," I said simply. "One Saturday. Stay home with your husband. We'll make pancakes, binge watch something terrible on Netflix, maybe even have actual conversations that don't revolve around Adrian's emotional well-being." You would have thought I'd asked her to donate a kidney. Her face contorted like I'd just suggested we murder puppies for fun. "I can't just bail on him, Marcus. He's expecting me." And there it was. The truth, wrapped up in a neat little package with a bow on top. Adrian was expecting her. Not hoping to see her, not casually available if she happened to be free, but expecting her, like she was his employee, his therapy appointment, his guaranteed Saturday morning entertainment. "What about what I'm expecting?" I asked, and even I could hear the edge creeping into my voice. "What about the fact that your husband might want to spend time with you occasionally? That's when she delivered the line that would change everything, the words that would replay in my head for weeks afterward like a broken record. She straightened up, put her hands on her hips, and looked at me with the kind of conviction usually reserved for courtroom dramas. If you don't trust me hanging out with my ex-husband every weekend, maybe we shouldn't be together. The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the neighbor's dog barking, a car starting somewhere down the street, the hum of our refrigerator that I'd been meaning to fix for months. But mostly, I could hear the sound of my marriage officially ending, even though neither of us realized it yet. I looked at her for a long time. Really looked at her. This woman I'd promised to love and cherish, who was now standing in our kitchen wearing my anniversary gift to meet another man, while giving me ultimatums about trust. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. You're absolutely right, I said finally, my voice calmer than I felt. Her face twisted in confusion, like a computer trying to process conflicting commands. This clearly wasn't the response she'd been expecting. She'd probably anticipated tears, begging, maybe even a good old-fashioned fight where I'd storm out and she could text Adrian about what an unreasonable husband she had. But I meant it, every single word. Because in that moment, sitting in our kitchen while she stood there ready to choose her ex-husband over me for the umpteenth time, I realized something profound. I was done. Not just with the Adrian situation, not just with the disrespect and the lying by omission, but with the entire charade of pretending this marriage was salvageable. You see, for months, I'd been sitting on something Clara didn't know about, something big. My company had offered me a dream position, a transfer to their London office with a salary that would make our current financial situation look like pocket change. We're talking $130,000 a year, plus a fully furnished 3-bedroom flat overlooking the Thames, plus my own team to manage. It was the kind of opportunity career counselors write fantasies about. I'd turned it down twice because every time I brought up the possibility of moving, Clara would shut it down faster than a nightclub at closing time. I can't leave my family, Marcus. My whole life is here. What about my job? What about my friends? What she really meant was, what about Adrian? Well, congratulations, Clara. You just solved that problem for me. That night, after she'd flounced out for her coffee date with her friend, I sat down at my laptop and composed the email that would change my life. The subject line was simple. London position acceptance. The message was even simpler. I'll take it. When can I start? The response came back within 2 hours. 2 weeks. Welcome to the team. I smiled for the first time in months. The next morning, Clara woke up with that post-ultimatum regret that hits people like a hangover after a night of drunk texting their ex. You know the feeling when you realize you've said something monumentally stupid and now you have to figure out how to backpedal without looking like a complete idiot? Spoiler alert. There's no graceful way to do it. She shuffled into the kitchen where I was already dressed and drinking coffee, scrolling through apartment listings in London like a man who'd just discovered Christmas morning. The panic in her eyes was almost comical, like a cartoon character who just realized they'd walked off a cliff and were about to plummet into the canyon below. Marcus, she started, her voice doing that weird thing where it goes up at the end, like she's asking a question even though she's making a statement, about yesterday. I think maybe we should talk. I looked up from my phone, where I'd been admiring a particularly nice flat in Canary Wharf. Talk about what, exactly? Your coffee date with Adrian? How it went? Whether you two discussed our marriage over lattes and croissants. Her face went through that familiar color-changing routine, pale to pink to red to that special shade of mortified people get when they realize they've screwed up beyond repair. That's not. I mean, we didn't. Marcus, I think you misunderstood what I said yesterday. Oh, this was rich. The classic, you misunderstood me defense, as if the English language had suddenly become too complicated for my simple male brain to comprehend. I set down my phone and gave her my full attention because this was going to be good. Really? Help me understand then. When you said, and I quote, if you don't trust me hanging out with my ex-husband every weekend, maybe we shouldn't be together, what exactly did you mean? Because to my admittedly limited understanding, that sounded like an ultimatum. She started doing that thing women do when they're caught in their own trap, the rapid-fire explanation that somehow makes everything worse. I was just frustrated, okay? You've been so jealous and suspicious lately, and I felt like you were trying to control who I could be friends with. I didn't mean we should actually break up. I just meant that trust is important in a relationship. Trust. The magic word that cheaters use when they want to gaslight you into thinking you're the problem. You're absolutely right, I said, standing up and grabbing my car keys. Trust is important. So is respect and common sense. And not spending every weekend with your ex-husband while your actual husband sits at home like a chump. That's when the waterworks started. Clara's eyes filled up like a broken dam, and suddenly, I was the villain in this story. Amazing how quickly the script flips when people realize there are consequences for their actions. "Where are you going?" she sniffled, like I was abandoning her to join the French Foreign Legion instead of just heading to work. "London," I said simply. "I accepted the transfer yesterday. I start in 2 weeks." The silence that followed was so complete I could have heard a pin drop in the next zip code. Clara's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, her brain apparently unable to process the information I just delivered. "You what? You can't. We never discussed. Marcus, you can't just decide to move to London without talking to me." The irony was so beautiful it almost brought a tear to my eye. The same woman who'd been making unilateral decisions about our weekends for months was suddenly concerned about couple communication. "Funny thing about ultimatums, Clara," I said. "When you give someone an either/or choice, you have to be prepared for them to pick the option you don't want." I left her standing in our kitchen, still in her pajamas, looking like someone had just told her that Santa Claus wasn't real and the Easter Bunny was actually a registered sex offender. The next 2 weeks were like living in a reality TV show, where the producers had decided to crank up the drama to 11. Clara went through all 5 stages of grief, sometimes cycling through them multiple times in a single day. It was exhausting to watch, and even more exhausting to live through. First came denial. She kept insisting I was being dramatic and that I'd come to my senses once I cooled down. She actually used air quotes when she said it, like my completely rational response to her ultimatum was some sort of emotional breakdown that would pass like a bad case of the flu. Then came anger. Oh boy, the anger. Clara turned into a one-woman demolition crew, slamming doors and throwing around accusations like confetti at a divorce party. I was abandoning her for money. I was running away from my problems. I was emotionally immature and couldn't handle her having male friends. The last one was particularly hilarious, considering her male friend was texting her at midnight and taking her to romantic restaurants every weekend. Bargaining was my personal favorite stage. Suddenly, Clara was full of compromises and solutions that had apparently never occurred to her during the 3 months of Adrian Fest. What if I only see him once a month? What if you come with us? What if we do couples therapy? Too little, too late, sweetheart. You don't get to renegotiate the terms after you've already blown up the contract. Depression hit when she realized I wasn't bluffing. I came home one day to find her sitting on our couch in the same clothes she'd worn the day before, surrounded by tissues like she was preparing for the world's saddest snowball fight. "I can't believe you're really leaving me," she sobbed. "How can you just throw away 3 years of marriage?" "I'm not throwing it away," I replied, continuing to pack my boxes with the efficiency of a man who'd finally found his purpose in life. "You already did that. I'm just cleaning up the mess." But the real magic happened when I started packing her stuff, too. See, here's the thing about our apartment that Clara had conveniently forgotten during her victim tour. The lease was in my name, only my name. Because when we'd moved in together, Clara had insisted on keeping her parents' address for tax purposes. A cute little euphemism for, I want to dodge my civic responsibilities while still enjoying all the benefits of adult life. I packed her belongings with the care and attention of a professional moving service, organized everything neatly in boxes, and placed them by the front door like a thoughtful husband preparing for his wife's extended vacation. The look on her face when she came home to find her entire life summarized in cardboard containers was absolutely priceless. "You can't kick me out," she screamed, apparently forgetting that she'd never legally moved in. "This is my home, too." "Actually," I said, pulling out the lease agreement that I'd thoughtfully highlighted for her convenience, "this is my home. You've been a guest. A very welcome guest for 3 years, but legally speaking, just a guest. And now the guest room is needed for other purposes." That's when she ran to our friends, because nothing says mature adult handling a relationship crisis like running to mommy and daddy, or in this case, to Jordan and Leia and anyone else who would listen to her tale of woe about how her heartless husband was abandoning her for filthy lucre. But here's where the story gets interesting. Remember Jordan, my best buddy with the expressive eyebrows? Well, Jordan had been doing some detective work of his own. The morning of my flight to London, I was feeling pretty damn good about life. My bags were packed, my new apartment keys were waiting for me across the pond, and I had that special kind of zen that comes from finally making a decision that doesn't suck. I was sipping my coffee and scrolling through my phone, mentally calculating what time it would be when I landed, when the doorbell rang like the opening notes of a funeral march. I opened the door to find Clara flanked by her personal cavalry, her mother, Teresa, and her younger sister, Hannah. They looked like they were heading to either a funeral or an intervention, which, considering the circumstances, was probably accurate on both counts. Teresa was clutching her purse like it contained the nuclear launch codes, while Hannah looked like she'd rather be literally anywhere else on planet Earth. "Marcus, sweetheart," Teresa began, pushing past me into the apartment with the confidence of someone who'd clearly been planning this ambush for days. "We need to talk." Oh, this was going to be good. I gestured them toward the living room where my suitcases stood like silent witnesses to my impending freedom. Clara immediately started eyeing them like they were ticking time bombs, while Teresa positioned herself on the couch like she was conducting a boardroom meeting. "This sudden move to London," Teresa continued, her voice dripping with that special brand of maternal concern that makes you feel like you're 12 years old and in trouble for breaking the neighbor's window. "It's clearly a cry for help, Marcus. You're having some sort of breakdown. And instead of working through it like adults, you're running away. A cry for help, right? Because accepting a dream job with a massive salary increase and escaping a marriage that had become more toxic than a Chernobyl picnic was obviously the behavior of someone who had lost his marbles." I nodded thoughtfully, like I was really considering her psychological assessment. "You're throwing your life away," she pressed on, warming up to her theme like a preacher hitting his stride. 3 years of marriage, all the memories you and Clara have built together, your home, your friends, all of it gone because you're having some sort of midlife crisis. Midlife crisis? I was 31. If this was my midlife crisis, it meant I was going to die at 62, which, considering how the last few months had gone, didn't sound entirely unreasonable. Hannah chimed in next, because apparently, this was a tag team intervention. "What about Clara?" she demanded, shooting her sister a look that was equal parts sympathy and exasperation. "You can't just leave her behind like she doesn't matter. She loves you, Marcus. She made a mistake, sure, but everyone makes mistakes. A mistake, singular." As if Clara's 3-month emotional affair with her ex-husband was just an oops moment, like accidentally putting salt in her coffee or wearing mismatched socks. I was impressed by their ability to minimize the situation with such artistic flair. Clara herself had been unusually quiet during this opening salvo, probably because she was still processing the sight of my packed luggage. But now she stepped forward, tears already forming in her eyes like she was an actress who'd been preparing for the scene her entire life. "Marcus," she whispered, her voice breaking just enough to sound authentically heartbroken. "Please don't do this. We can work through this. I'll stop seeing Adrian. I'll do whatever you want. Just don't leave me." And there it was. The performance I'd been expecting. The tearful confession, the promises to change, the desperate bargaining that comes when people realize they've pushed someone too far and the consequences are finally catching up with them. It might have been touching if it hadn't come about 3 months and 17 Adrian dates too late. I looked at the three of them, Teresa with her righteous indignation, Hannah with her misplaced loyalty, and Clara with her crocodile tears, and realized this was the perfect moment for the grand finale. The piece de resistance that Jordan had uncovered through his detective work. "That's really touching, Clara," I said, pulling out my phone. "But before we get too deep into the whole redemption arc, there's something I think everyone should see." I opened the screenshots that Jordan had forwarded to me and held up my phone so all 3 women could see them clearly. The messages were from Adrian's private gym chat group, where he'd been bragging to his workout buddies about his conquest like some sort of suburban Casanova. "Book club is just code," read the first message. "She's basically single now. 3 months of coffee dates and she's already planning to leave her husband for me." The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. Teresa's face went white. Hannah's mouth dropped open, and Clara looked like someone had just told her that her lottery ticket was a fake. But wait, there was more. The next screenshot was even better. "Her husband is such a cuck. Doesn't even know we've been hooking up in my car after every coffee date." That last message hit Clara like a physical blow. Her face went from white to green to red in about 3 seconds, cycling through colors like a broken traffic light. Teresa slowly sank back into the couch, her intervention speech apparently forgotten in the face of actual evidence. "Context," Clara suddenly screamed, finding her voice again. "You don't understand the context. Adrian was he was lying to his friends. He was making it sound like more than it was. Context. The refuge of the caught cheater." "What context exactly?" I asked mildly. "The context where you've been lying to me for 3 months? The context where you've been meeting your ex-husband every weekend while telling me it was innocent? Or the context where you gave me an ultimatum yesterday about trusting you? Hannah was looking at her sister like she'd never seen her before, which was probably accurate. Teresa had gone completely silent, apparently realizing that her daughter's marriage problems were a bit more complicated than she'd originally thought. This is all taken out of context, Clara insisted, but her voice had lost all its conviction. She sounded like a defense attorney who just realized her client was guilty as sin, and the jury had already made up their minds. I looked at each of them in turn, letting the weight of the evidence settle in the room like dust after an explosion. If you didn't mean the ultimatum, I said finally, you shouldn't have given it. That ended the discussion more effectively than a gavel in a courtroom. Teresa gathered her purse and stood up without another word, apparently deciding that strategic retreat was better than continued engagement. Hannah followed suit, shooting Clara a look that suggested there would be some very interesting conversations in the family group chat later. Clara made one last desperate attempt at damage control. Marcus, please. My flight leaves in 4 hours, I interrupted, checking my watch with the casual efficiency of a man who had places to be and lives to live. Jordan's coming to pick me up in 20 minutes. You might want to call Adrian. I'm sure he'll be very comforting during this difficult time. As they filed out of my apartment, my former apartment, I should say, Clara turned back one last time. What am I supposed to do now? I don't know, I replied honestly. But I'm sure you'll figure it out. You're very resourceful when it comes to making plans. The door closed behind them with a satisfying click, and I was alone with my suitcases and my freedom. Landing at Heathrow was like stepping into a different universe, where the air actually tasted like possibility instead of disappointment and betrayal. I'd left behind the smoking wreckage of my marriage and walked straight into what felt like the opening scene of a movie where the protagonist finally gets his life together. The kind of movie where the guy starts off beaten down and ends up running through the airport in slow motion while inspirational music plays in the background. My new flat was everything the company had promised and more. Located in Canary Wharf, it overlooked the Thames with floor-to-ceiling windows that made me feel like I was living inside a screensaver. 3 bedrooms, modern kitchen, and a view that made Clara's precious hometown look like a strip mall parking lot. Every morning, I'd wake up and look out at the river, watching the boats go by while drinking coffee that actually tasted good because it wasn't seasoned with resentment and marital dysfunction. The office was a revelation, too. My colleagues were sharp, ambitious people who treated work like something they actually wanted to excel at, rather than just a way to pay for weekend drama sessions with ex-husbands. My new team was hungry, innovative, and refreshingly free of anyone named Adrian. For the first time in years, I was excited about Monday mornings instead of dreading them like a dental appointment. Meanwhile, back in the land of the free and home of the emotionally immature, Clara was apparently struggling with the concept that actions have consequences. According to my LinkedIn feed, she decided to take her grievances public, posting one of those vague social media manifestos that divorced people love so much. When someone you love abandons you without warning for money and career advancement, it really shows you who they truly are, she'd written, along with some inspirational quote about surviving betrayal and finding strength in solitude. The post was accompanied by a black and white photo of her looking pensively out a window, because nothing says authentic emotional pain like a carefully staged Instagram moment. But here's the thing about small towns and social media. Everyone knows everyone's business, and Clara had apparently forgotten that our entire social circle had been watching her Adrian show for the past 3 months. The comments on her post were absolutely brutal in that passive-aggressive way that only Facebook comments can achieve. "Didn't you dump him for Adrian though?" wrote Jessica from her yoga class. "Girl, we saw your stories every weekend with your friend," added someone named Brittany with about 17 crying laughing emojis. "Maybe check the dictionary definition of abandonment before using it," suggested Mike from my old office, who'd apparently been keeping track of the drama like it was his personal reality show. The post disappeared within 6 hours, which was probably a new record for social media regret. But the internet is forever, and screenshots had already made their way into various group chats and private messages. Clara's attempt at controlling the narrative had backfired spectacularly, like trying to put out a fire with gasoline. Then came the plot twist I hadn't seen coming, though in hindsight, it was inevitable. Adrian's girlfriend, yes, he had a girlfriend this whole time, because of course he did, decided to reach out to me through LinkedIn. Her name was Sophie, and she was apparently everything Clara wasn't: direct, honest, and refreshingly free of nonsense. "I think we need to talk," her message read. "Adrian has been lying to both of us. Sophie, it turned out, was a paralegal who'd been dating Adrian for 8 months. She believed his story about Clara being a crazy ex-wife who was obsessed with him and wouldn't leave him alone. According to Adrian's version of events, Clara was the one pursuing him, showing up uninvited and begging for reconciliation, while he nobly tried to be there for her as a friend during her marital difficulties. The cognitive dissonance was almost impressive. Adrian had managed to convince his girlfriend that he was the victim of Clara's obsession while simultaneously bragging to his gym buddies about his conquest. It takes a special kind of sociopathic talent to spin two completely contradictory narratives with such confidence. I sent Sophie everything. Every screenshot Jordan had uncovered, every timeline detail, every piece of evidence that painted a very different picture from the one Adrian had been selling her. Her response was swift and decisive. She dumped him publicly on Facebook, posting all the screenshots along with a caption that would have made a prosecutor weep with joy. Ladies, when a man tells you his ex-wife is crazy and obsessed with him, ask yourself why he keeps meeting up with her every weekend. P.S. Adrian, your gym buddies can read these messages too. Hope the book club was worth it. Within hours, book club had become Adrian's permanent nickname throughout our entire social circle. The guys at his gym started calling him that. His coworkers picked it up, and eventually it spread to every bar, restaurant, and coffee shop in town. Adrian couldn't go anywhere without someone asking about his book club activities, with a smirk that suggested they knew exactly what kind of books he'd been reading. The beautiful thing about small-town justice is that once you become a joke, you stay a joke. Adrian had gone from thinking he was Don Juan to being the town's official punchline. And there was literally nothing he could do about it. Every time someone saw him, they'd think about those screenshots and wonder what other lies he was telling. But the real karmic justice was watching Clara's reaction to Sophie's post. According to Leia, who'd apparently appointed herself as my unofficial intel source, Clara had tried to spin the whole thing as revenge from a jealous woman who couldn't handle the truth about her relationship. But the screenshots spoke for themselves, and Clara found herself in the impossible position of trying to deny evidence that everyone could see with their own eyes. The comments on Sophie's post were like watching a masterclass in public humiliation. Person after person shared their own Adrian stories. Apparently, this wasn't his first rodeo when it came to manipulating multiple women simultaneously. Clara wasn't his first victim, and she probably wouldn't have been his last if Sophie hadn't blown up his entire operation. My personal favorite comment came from a woman named Rachel who wrote, "Adrian told me the same story about his crazy ex-wife 2 years ago. Seems like all his ex-wives are crazy, which is statistically improbable unless the common denominator is him." Meanwhile, my life in London was everything I'd hoped it would be and more. The work was challenging and rewarding. My apartment was a sanctuary of peace and quiet, and I was finally sleeping through the night without wondering what my wife was texting about at midnight. I joined a local gym where nobody knew my name or my history, started exploring the city like a tourist in my own life, and discovered that happiness wasn't some elusive concept. It was just what happened when you removed toxic people from your daily routine. Every morning, I checked my phone to see the latest updates from the American Disaster Channel, formerly known as My Marriage. It was like watching a train wreck in slow motion, except the train had derailed months ago and was now just rolling down a hill, collecting more debris with every rotation. And the best part? I was 3,000 miles away, sipping excellent coffee, and building a life that actually made sense. I thought I'd successfully escaped the gravitational pull of my former life's drama, like a rocket ship that had finally broken free from Earth's atmosphere and was cruising peacefully through the cosmic void. My London routine had become beautifully predictable: excellent coffee, challenging work, Thames views, and a blissful absence of anything remotely resembling the Clara Adrian soap opera. I was living my best life, which apparently made me a prime target for the universe's twisted sense of humor. It was a Tuesday morning, I remember, because I'd just finished a particularly satisfying meeting with my team about expanding into the European markets. I walked out of our Canary Wharf office building and nearly choked on my coffee. There, standing next to the fountain like some sort of deranged tourist, was Clara. In London. 3,000 miles from where she was supposed to be, looking like she'd been sleeping in airport chairs and living off vending machine snacks. For a moment, I wondered if I was having some sort of stress-induced hallucination. Maybe the combination of jet lag and British weather had finally broken my brain, and I was now seeing my ex-wife's ghost haunting the financial district of my life. But no, She was definitely real, complete with wrinkled clothes, disheveled hair, and that particular brand of desperation that only comes from making terrible life decisions and doubling down on them. She spotted me before I could duck back into the building and pretend I'd never left. Her face lit up with a kind of manic relief usually reserved for people who've been lost in the desert and just spotted an oasis. She waved at me like we were old friends running into each other at a high school reunion, rather than estranged spouses whose marriage had imploded in spectacular fashion. "Marcus," she called out, jogging toward me with the enthusiasm of a golden retriever who'd just seen a tennis ball. "I can't believe I found you. This city is huge." I stood there, coffee cup halfway to my lips, trying to process the sheer audacity of the situation. She'd flown across the Atlantic Ocean to ambush me outside my workplace like some sort of international stalker. The woman who couldn't be bothered to skip one Saturday coffee date with her ex-husband had apparently found the motivation to book a transatlantic flight and track me down in a city of 9 million people. "Clara," I said finally, my voice carrying all the enthusiasm of someone who'd just discovered a parking ticket on their windshield. "What the hell are you doing here?" She seemed genuinely taken aback by my less than enthusiastic reception, which was rich, considering she'd shown up uninvited to my new life, like a walking reminder of every mistake I'd ever made. "I just wanted to talk," she said, her voice doing that wounded puppy thing that used to work on me back when I was stupid enough to care. "Can we get coffee?" "Please, coffee." Of course, because nothing said reconciliation like recreating the same activity that had destroyed our marriage in the first place. But something about her appearance, the dark circles under her eyes, the desperate way she was clutching her purse like a life preserver, made me curious about just how far she'd fallen since I'd left. Against my better judgment, which had clearly taken a vacation to somewhere more sensible, I agreed. We found a cafe near the office, one of those trendy London places that served coffee in cups the size of soup bowls and charged accordingly. Clara ordered some complicated drink with multiple modifiers, probably trying to delay the inevitable conversation, while I stuck with a simple Americano because I had actual work to get back to. She looked rough, really rough, the kind of rough that comes from weeks of poor decisions and sleepless nights. Her usually perfect hair was limp and lifeless. Her makeup was minimal and slightly smudged, and her clothes looked like she'd grabbed them off the floor of her childhood bedroom. This wasn't the polished, confident woman who'd been gallivanting around town with Adrian just a few weeks ago. "You look good," she said, which was probably true. London had been good to me. Better sleep, less stress, and the general glow that comes from not living with someone who makes you question your sanity on a daily basis. "The city suits you." "It does," I agreed, not bothering to return the compliment because honestly, she looked like she'd been hit by a truck carrying a load of regret and poor life choices. She fidgeted with her coffee cup, stirring it obsessively like she was trying to divine the future from the foam patterns. "Marcus, I need you to know that I made a terrible mistake. The worst mistake of my life." I was confused and stupid, and I threw away the best thing that ever happened to me. Here we go, I thought. The grand apology tour, complete with self-flagellation and promises of redemption. I'd been expecting this conversation since the day I left, though I'd hoped it would come via email or text message rather than an in-person performance in a London cafe. "I've been miserable since you left," she continued, her voice starting to crack around the edges. "Absolutely miserable. Nothing feels right without you. I can't sleep. I can't eat. I can't concentrate at work. I just keep thinking about all the ways I screwed up and wondering if there's any way to fix this." The thing about apologies is that they work best when they come before the relationship explodes, not after you've been caught red-handed and faced with consequences. Clara's remorse felt about as genuine as a $3 bill, timed perfectly to coincide with her realization that the grass wasn't actually greener on Adrian's side of the fence. "What happened with Adrian?" I asked, because I was genuinely curious about how that train wreck had concluded. Her face crumpled like a house of cards in a windstorm. "It wasn't what I thought it would be. Once he left, he changed. He became demanding and possessive. He wanted me to move in with him immediately, quit my job, start having kids right away. It was like he thought he owned me or something." Fascinating. Adrian had gone from being the sensitive ex-husband who needed emotional support to a controlling nightmare the moment he thought he'd won. It was almost like he'd been putting on an act to steal someone else's wife. And once he'd succeeded, the mask had come off. Who could have possibly seen that coming? "So, you broke up?" I pressed. "I tried to," she said, her voice getting smaller, but he didn't take it well. He started showing up at my work, calling me constantly, telling everyone that I was just having commitment issues and would come around. It was like living with a stalker. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Clara had left a stable, respectful marriage for a man who turned out to be exactly the kind of person she'd accused me of being when I questioned her. Weekend adventures. Life has a funny way of teaching lessons to people who refuse to learn them the easy way. I'm sorry that happened to you, I said. And I actually meant it. Nobody deserves to be stalked or harassed. Not even someone who'd made spectacularly poor choices. But I'm not sure what you expect me to do about it. That's when she dropped the bombshell that made this whole conversation shift from pathetic to absolutely insane. I'm pregnant, she whispered, tears starting to flow down her cheeks like a broken faucet. And I don't know what to do. The pregnancy announcement hung in the air between us like a toxic cloud. For a moment, I genuinely thought Clara had finally lost whatever tenuous grip on reality she'd been maintaining. I stared at her across the cafe table, watching tears stream down her face while she waited for my reaction, and all I could think was, this woman has officially gone off the deep end. I started laughing. Not a cruel laugh, not a mocking laugh, but the kind of genuine, from-the-belly laughter that happens when someone tells you something so absurd that your brain can't process it any other way. Other cafe patrons started looking over at us, probably wondering if they were witnessing a proposal gone wrong or a mental breakdown in progress. Pregnant, I repeated, wiping tears from my eyes. That's your play here? Really? After everything that's happened, you're going with a fake pregnancy angle. Her face went through several interesting color changes, confusion, hurt, anger, and then that particular shade of red that people get when they realize their lie has been called out publicly. I'm not lying, she protested. But her voice had that hollow ring that bad actors get when they're overselling their performance. Clara, I said, leaning back in my chair with the relaxed confidence of someone who holds all the cards. We haven't had sex in over 2 months. I know this because I was there, or rather, I wasn't there, if you catch my drift. You were too busy with your book club activities to be interested in your actual husband. The silence that followed was deafening. She opened and closed her mouth like a fish gasping for air, clearly trying to come up with some explanation that would make her story believable. But we both knew the math didn't work. And even Clara's creative relationship with the truth couldn't bend reality that far. It could be from before, she whispered weakly. But even she didn't sound convinced. From before what? Before you decided that Adrian was more important than our marriage? Before you started spending every weekend playing house with your ex-husband? Be specific, Clara, because my calendar is pretty clear on when we stopped being intimate. She crumpled then, her whole fake pregnancy facade collapsing like a house of cards in a hurricane. The tears kept flowing, but now they seemed more genuine, tears of frustration and desperation rather than manipulative crocodile tears. I just needed you to care, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the ambient cafe noise. I thought if you believed I was pregnant, you'd want to work things out. You'd remember that you loved me once. And there it was, the truth wrapped up in the most pathetic package imaginable. Clara had flown 3,000 miles to lie to my face about being pregnant because she thought it would magically erase months of betrayal and manipulation. The woman who'd given me an ultimatum about trust was now trying to manipulate me with fake medical conditions. I did love you once, I said quietly. And for the first time since she'd appeared outside my office, I felt something resembling sadness instead of just irritation. I loved you for 3 years, but you only noticed when I stopped. She looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes, mascara streaking down her cheeks in abstract patterns that would have been artistic if they weren't so pathetic. So what now? You're just going to stay in London forever? Build a whole new life without me? That's exactly what I'm going to do, I confirmed. Because that's what people do when their marriages end. They move on. They build better lives. They don't chase their ex-spouses across international borders with fake pregnancy stories. Clara flew home that night, defeated and broken in ways that almost made me feel sorry for her. Almost. But sympathy was a luxury I couldn't afford when it came to someone who'd spent months systematically destroying our marriage and then expected me to fix the consequences of her choices. The real entertainment started after she got back to the States. According to my network of involuntary correspondents, mostly Leia, who seemed to think I needed regular updates on The Clara Show, my ex-wife had apparently learned nothing from our London conversation and was already back to her old patterns. 2 weeks after her failed reconciliation mission, Clara was posting Instagram stories from a CrossFit gym featuring a suspiciously attractive trainer named Damien. Because nothing says I've learned from my mistakes, like immediately rebounding with another fitness professional who probably had the emotional depth of a puddle. The Instagram posts were a masterclass in self-deception. Clara was suddenly all about self-improvement and working on herself, posting inspirational quotes about how soulmates arrive when you're ready to work on yourself and the universe brings you what you need when you need it most. The irony was so thick you could package it and sell it as a dietary supplement. Meanwhile, back in London, I was discovering that karma has a sense of humor that rivals any comedy writer. Adrian, apparently unable to learn from his previous humiliation, had somehow managed to land a job in London. Not just in London, but in the exact same corporate housing building where I was living. The universe was either testing my patience or setting up the world's most elaborate practical joke. I first encountered him in the lobby on a Tuesday morning, looking every bit as smarmy as I remembered, but now with the added bonus of seeming slightly desperate. He was with a young woman who looked like she'd stepped out of a fashion magazine, all legs and cheekbones, and the kind of confidence that comes from never having experienced real consequences for poor decisions. "Marcus," Adrian called out, like we were old college buddies who'd lost touch over the years instead of the two corners of a love triangle that had exploded spectacularly. "What are the odds? Small world, right?" He introduced the young woman as Chloe, his girlfriend, with air quotes that suggested their relationship status was about as stable as a house of cards in a windstorm. Chloe looked at me with mild interest, clearly not knowing she was standing next to both the victim and the perpetrator of one of the messier relationship disasters in recent memory. "Adrian," I nodded politely, because I'd learned that the best revenge is living well and not engaging with people who've already proven they're not worth your time. "Chloe, nice to meet you." By the end of that week, Chloe had dumped Adrian in the building's WhatsApp group chat after discovering his illustrious history with married women. Apparently,